Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host of Fiberchats, and my guest today comes to us from Vancouver, Canada, Kelly from On a Quest for Fibers. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, hello.
Welcome to the Fiberchats.
Thank
So,
you.
you've met on Instagram, and you doing something that I'm very curious about, but know nothing about. So, you're doing spinning with the spindles. And the first time I saw the variety of spindles was when I went to Rhinebeck, and I saw this booth with like hundreds of different kinds. My first question for you, why would you choose hand spindle versus like a spinning wheel, which seems to be much faster doing the same job?
Okay, that is the perfect question to start this chat off with because I use a support spindle when I need that time of just meditation and slowing down. That is the one thing, that's why I was attracted to using a support spindle because at the time I was going through a very stressful time and I needed something to just calm myself down. And I just saw this video on YouTube one day back in like 2007. And I just kept playing it over and over and over again because I wanted to learn because it just looked so relaxing. And so that's why I was drawn to using a support spindle over a wheel. And anytime that I just need that meditative, I call it my Zen. Um, that's when I will be drawn to using my support spindle. I still use my wheel. If I've got, some fiber and I just want it into yarn like tomorrow, then I will get on my wheel and do it right away. But I do use both, interchangeably. And a lot of it does depend on my mood.
Well, tell me, like, educate me on spindles because I saw there's like drop spindles and support spindles, and then there's like different variations of the things. Like, tell me, like, why would a person choose one over another?
Okay, so there is a drop spindle. That's actually one of the spindles I learned. That's what I learned on before I started spinning on a spinning wheel. And I find that for a beginner, that really lets you concentrate on pulling out the fiber, like learning how to draft your fiber. So a drop spindle is great for a beginner who doesn't even know how to spin. It's great for a beginner. When you are more advanced and you're going through all different types of spindles, a drop spindle is a nice thing to fall back onto. Like if you want to walk around and you want to spin, you can walk and spin at the same time. So that's what's nice about a drop spindle. And then you have a Turkish spindle, which is used very much like a drop spindle in that you are drafting the fiber and then the spindle is dropping down to the floor. But with a Turkish spindle, what it enables you to do is actually to wind the fiber onto the arms of the spindle and to create a nest. We call them, a lot of people call them in the fiber community, a turtle. And then what you do is after you're finished spinning, then that turtle or nest you can then take and ply with later. I myself like to use a Turkish spindle as a support spindle, but we'll get into that in a few minutes. The other thing that you can use is support spindles. Now there's very different types of support spindles. There's a Russian support spindle, and that one is very, it's very sleek in design. And that is a great spindle to start with as a support spindle. And, you know, there's lots of makers that make just the support spindle, and they all vary in design, but they all fundamentally have the same use, in that you put the spindle in a bowl and then you spin with it that way. And using a support spindle, the support spindle is usually in your lap or beside you on the chair. So you are seated and then you're spinning. So that's great for, like, if you're in the car, like I do a lot of spinning in the car, versus a drop spindle or Turkish spindle where you're walking and you're dropping it. So
Well, let's talk about your fiber journey. Like, you go from watching a single video to now teaching classes and actually creating your own kind of spindle. Like, tell me how all of that happened. What was that like?
okay, so I went to a fiber show in 2006. A lady put a spindle in my hand and some fiber, and I tried to spin with a support spindle. I should mention that. And I was like, wow, I'll never get the hang of this, right? But I was just drawn to it. Then I saw the video on YouTube, like I mentioned, and I was drawn to it. So I just kept persistence. It was like I just needed that calm, the calm that I could see resonating from this lady in the video. I wanted that. I wanted that. So I just kept, you know, practicing over and over and over. And, you know, it's like trying to ride a bicycle, you know, eventually it clicks. And I just enjoyed it. I never looked back. And I just kept spinning with different spindles over the years. I mean, we're now in 2022, right? So it's been a journey. And then I had a couple of people about 2 years ago say to me, "Oh, Kelly, I wish I could do that. Could you teach me?" And I thought, okay, well, I think I could teach you how to do that. So, you know, I started with a couple of people and got comfortable teaching and decided to start offering a online video course, in-person video course, and that's gone over really well. And then I said to my husband, you know, I'm dyeing fiber and I'm spinning with spindles, but you know, I would really like to have the whole package, right? And so we worked together, and being a spinner, the spindle had to have exactly the key elements that I like in spinning, of course. So he came up with the design, and so now I've got the whole kit. So yeah, yeah.
How did you decide to start dyeing fiber? Because it's one thing to spin, it's whole other industry basically to dye fiber.
Yeah, actually, dyeing fiber, my interest came before spindles. I started dyeing fiber. My first dyeing project, I have to laugh, I have to tell you this, was with Kool-Aid, right? And I had some alpaca um, fiber. I washed it and everything. And I thought, oh, I'm going to dye this fiber with red Kool-Aid, and I'm going to knit some socks. Well, you can't knit socks with 100% alpaca. It they just don't hold up, right? So so that was my first experiment. I started off with Kool-Aid, and then I just kind of did a little bit off and on. In that time frame, I also raised German Angora rabbits. So I was raising them and I was harvesting their fiber, and then I was sending that fiber off to a wool mill. They made it into yarn, and then I would dye the yarn. So that's where all that part started. And some of that now is past history. I don't have any German Angora rabbits anymore. So, but that's where the dyeing started.
Now you're also dyeing yarn. Was that
Um,
like a natural transition?
yes, see, okay, so here's a real what do I want to say? On one side of my of on a quest for fiber, I have the whole spinning of with spindles and dyeing the fiber with commercial acid dyes, right? But I've always been drawn to, natural dyeing, and growing plants and everything. And last year, if you were following me on Instagram, I was, you know, doing a little bit of experimenting with dyeing fiber with plant material. And oh, I mean, it's a real labor of love because it's a very slow process. And I just found that it wasn't something that I wanted to spend that much time on. So I thought, well, I can still do yarn. And I have a lot of people don't know this, but I have an organic sock yarn. It is a super wash yarn, but it's been organically super washed, if you want to say. And I just thought that was the thing. I thought, great, that works perfect for me because I can dye yarn with plants and then I can do the knitting with it or the crocheting. So
Well, I mean, so you obviously very crafty and you love that. How do you combine that with the business side of it?
well, the business side for me, it's all about teaching others how to use a support spindle. That's my real passion, and that's really come to light even in the last year. So that's where I'm really concentrating my efforts. Um, you know, using a spindle, we'll say support, but using a spindle requires fiber, and I usually like to spin dyed fiber, right? Because it's more colorful. And yeah, so that's what I would say. That's what on a quest for fiber is really concentrating on more.
Was COVID helpful or hurtful in that respect?
Helpful. It was helpful because people were at home, they were stressed, they wanted something to do, and they saw this online class that they could take from me. The other thing too that I wanted to mention, and some people have said to me, you know, I want to be able to download your class and watch it on my time, and I've hesitated doing that because I really um, want to stress that when you take a one-on-one class with me in live, like we're together, like you and I right now, right? I'm really watching what you're doing, and if and trying to get you to go in the right direction, right? And if you're just buying a course online from me that's all pre-recorded, you're not you're not going to get that instant feedback right away, and it can be just so little that somebody's just doing one little thing, and it just takes that small correction, and then they're like, oh my gosh, Kelly, I can't believe I'm doing it.
Well, I
So
mean, is that ever frustrating for you? Because it's one thing when somebody is standing right next to you and you can put your hands on it and show, and it's another thing when you're doing it over internet, right? Like, do
yeah,
you ever
well,
get frustrated?
no, I've been told that I have an extreme amount of patience. If you look at the recommendations on Etsy, that's where my shop is, and you see sorry, not recommendations, for the class. It's been brought to my attention that, a lot of my students think that I have, a great deal of patience. Um, and it's just a love, right? When you love doing something, you just want to share it with others. And yeah, sometimes it might take a little more than 2 1-hour classes, but it's it it goes really well. For example, I had one student, and I have to share this. She was on Etsy. She saw support spindle. And at first, she didn't even really know what it was for. She just loved the spindle and she bought it. And then she found out that I was teaching this class online. She contacted me and wanted to sign up for the class. Now, she never had touched fiber in her life. She didn't know how to knit. She didn't know how to crochet, nothing. She just liked this spindle. And we spent the first 50 minutes, that's 50, just on learning how to draft the fiber. And I thought for sure that she was going to say to me, I want my money back because I've only got another, 70 minutes of class time left, right? Well, in the last 10 minutes of the class, she started being able um, to twist the fiber, spin the fiber. And then in the next class, we just worked on that, and she was on her way by the end of the second class, believe it or not, because I was like, oh my gosh, she was doing it. Now she signed up for 2 more classes after that, only because she was an absolute beginner. Like she says to me now, well, will you teach me how to knit? And I said, no, that I don't have the patience for.
Well,
But
I'm talking about that, right? Like when other people tell you that you're a very patient person, do you see yourself as a very patient person?
yes, I do. Yeah, honestly, yeah. Hmm.
So when you teach, right, it's one thing when you know how to do something. It's a whole other animal to teach somebody else how to do that. What did you learn along the way? Like, did you learn how to be more efficient teacher?
Yes, what I did is I really broke every step down into tiny, tiny little segments. And that's where we start, right at step one. It's just, every move that I made, I just, you know, documented that in a file in my head, like, okay, this is the first thing that they have to learn, and then the second, like, it's very, I just learned that in order to teach somebody else, I just had to break things down very, very, very small segments. And then as they learn the first segment, and then the second, and then the third, then it all just starts to flow, and then it works. Like I tell my students, you're not gonna sit here and at the end of the second class, you're going to be going like this with your arm, like you see on videos, right? I mean, that takes, well, for me, it took a couple of years, but it's not going to be like that right away. So,
Well, I mean, is there like, do you think there is a person that you cannot teach? Like, have you ever met somebody who's just like not capable of learning it?
I have not had a student that hasn't walked away from my class and has not succeeded at learning how to spin. Um, I have had a student that said to me, she was getting frustrated. And she says, I can't do this. I can't do this. Right. So that's the biggest obstacle. If you have somebody that has that mindset that they're not going to learn, then that's hard. Now, I told her, I said, look, we're just going to break this down. Don't get yourself worked up. We're just going to start right at the beginning, and we'll work through. And that's what I did. So
Let's talk fibers. Do you have a favorite? Do you have something that you like is complete
I
luxury for you?
I love Blue Face Leicester. I love Blue Face Leicester. I love how there's no silk in it, but it's just smooth. It's just so smooth. It's got a wonderful staple length, like the length of the fiber from tip to tip is a nice length. And I would say though that my favorite second is Polworth. I love Polworth. after I've spun up Polworth and made it into yarn, it's just so springy. And that knitters talk about that. It's got that squishy feeling. So yeah, those are my two favorites.
So when you first started spinning, I'm assuming you didn't start with the most expensive fiber on the planet. Like, what was your discovery of different fibers? What was surprising in that? Like, did you meet some fiber and you thought you totally got it and it didn't cooperate?
Yes. So I started out with Romney, and I know from experience now that depending on the type of lamb that if you get a lamb versus an older sheep, right? The lamb Romney can be very, very nice and soft. But the Romney I had, not knowing any better, was very coarse. It was very coarse. So I'm trying to learn how to spin. I've got a coarse fiber. I'm overspinning it, so it's spinning like rope. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing wrong? I don't. Um, and then I went to alpaca. I mentioned the alpaca earlier. And that was an improvement, but I failed to realize that alpaca is lovely for items that don't require any memory, right? For drape things that you want to have drape. And so, I had to learn with that. And then I think the third fiber that I came across was blue face luster. That was the third one. And I haven't really experimented with, that's not true. I did have Falkland in the shop. I was working with Falkland. I love Falkland. And surprisingly enough, Cheviot, I believe that's how they say it, it's more of a medium to coarse fiber, but when I have that fiber, it doesn't last in the store at all. People love that fiber. And I found that is a really nice fiber for myself for, outerwear sweaters or hats or mittens.
Well, when you go to festivals now, is it hard for you to stop buying fiber? Like, there is this obsession of people going to festivals and like bringing back half of that back home with them. Like, do you have that issue?
Yes and no. Yes, because I want to do it all. Like, I want to do it all, right? I want to buy the raw fleece, I want to wash it, and I want to make it into yarn. But then there's the other part of me that's like, okay, Kelly, hang on a second. You can't create the wheel and do everything. Like there's got to be a happy point or a point where you just say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, right? So I don't buy fleeces to clean them and then spin with. I mostly concentrate on buying commercial comb top that I then dye. So.
Like, are you like disciplined about what you're buying in a sense that you'll come there and you'll say, okay, I need this amount of that kind of fiber and this amount of this kind of fiber, or something suddenly calls your name?
Yeah, I would say when I go to the shows, my my weakness is more on the hardware of spinning than it is the actual fiber. So yeah,
I
if
saw
I
you showed like on Instagram a few of the spindles that you have. Have you counted how many you actually have?
I have 12 spindles.
Is there a favorite?
Well, it just came in the mail on Monday. I purchased a spindle by Joe Gallen, and he's from, I believe he's from Arizona. I'd have to look that up. I apologize. But his spindles are the ones with all the I call it the bling, spinning with bling, because they're very, very sparkly. And yeah, so I've really fallen in love with that one. Um, the one other maker of spindles, and his spindles are the ones that I started off with. And well, I would say 100% of my students, I've always recommended his spindles. I'm not affiliated with him in any way in terms of a business sense, but is Mike from Spanish Peacock. Um, his his Tibetan spindle was actually the first spindle, support spindle I purchased, and very, very fine craftsmanship. So yeah, so I recommend his spindles a lot. So.
So how do you decide how much time you're gonna spend spinning versus other part of the craft? Like when you need, when do you have time to knit?
That's a good question. So, like I said, spinning for me is, so using a support spindle for me is all about just needing that quiet time in my life. So I don't really think about the time per se. It's just the process of doing it. And I have to say, with knitting, I find that I'm also more about the process of knitting versus actually the progress of knitting. Um, I took on a big project of knitting a cardigan sweater for my husband. It was the Jones cardigan by Tin Can Knits, and that for me, that was a large undertaking, and I got it done. But yeah, it's I don't know. I just try to balance, as much as I can. Okay, I've done a bit of spinning. Okay, now I should do, a bit of knitting. So.
Where do you see this business going? Like what's your, like if you could just make any wish, right? What would it be?
Be in a classroom of people that want to learn how to spin, and be at a knit city, or another show like that, and be able to, in person to person, teach others how to spin. So.
Have you ever taken a spinning class like from other instructors?
No, no. I just I just watched, and I think the video is actually still on YouTube. It's a lady, she's sitting on the floor on a carpet. She's got a blue pleated skirt laying out on the floor. She's got a black spindle, beautiful black ebony spindle, and she's just spinning. And I tell you, I would just sit there and rewind, watch, like just keep, okay, what is she doing now? Like I said, I was just determined to learn. So yeah.
Is it difficult to find information on like what's appropriate spindle for what kind of fiber, or what kind of fiber is appropriate for what kind of knitting? Like how
Hmm.
did you learn that?
I actually, a lot of the makers, like I know, Spanish Peacock Mike, his wife, and I believe they even have it on their website, that they will give you a range. And I know Bosworth Spindles, they make the drop spindles. They actually too will, I know for sure that they have a chart on their website telling you, if you want a finer yarn versus a thicker yarn, what type of spindle to use. But in terms of the actual fiber, I think you have to say to yourself, okay, where are you in learning how to spin? Because you want to have that longer staple length when you're learning to spin versus the shorter. Like you wouldn't want to start spinning camel, or what do they call that? Kiviot, those are all very short stapled fibers. So I think a lot has to do with your skill level when you're starting to spin as to what you want to spin with, and also, what do you want to make out of the yarn when you've spun it, right? So
Well, so when I learned how to knit, it was mostly like thicker yarn, thicker needles, something simple projects. Then very quickly I discovered lace, and then as soon as I discovered lace, it became almost like an Olympic Games when like each project became thinner lace, thinner needles to the point when now it's like on gossamer and toothpicks. Do you have the same thing when you spin? Do you try to achieve like the thinnest possible yarn?
yes, yes, yeah, I do. I did go down that rabbit hole of doing that. But you can only, with spinning, you can only get so fine, and then it's gonna break, right? So but yeah, I know there are some beautiful fine, fine, fine lace yarns that were hand spun, and they're just gorgeous. But I'm still a work in progress on that one.
Where do you see yourself on this like journey, right? From the beginner to where you now? Like, do you see yourself as an expert spinner?
Hmm. Oh, that's a hard question. To produce the yarn that I would love to produce, like the ultimate yarn, I would say that I'm intermediate, because I would love to be able, like you were saying, to create a yarn that I could use in a Shetland lace shawl, the wedding ring shawl. That would be, that's my wish for myself. So if I compare where I am right now, yeah, I'm not close to that yet. But in terms of the mechanics of using spindles and spinning fiber, I would say, yeah, I'm advanced. So
If somebody wanted to get into the business, if somebody wanted to become an instructor, was thinking about it, and asked you for advice, what advice would you give them?
I would say to them, go very slow with your students, break it down very, very specifically as to each step in the process of spinning. Don't try, even though you as the instructor can sit here and you can spin like this, remember what it was like for you day one when you were learning how to spin, and just break it down to very, very small steps. And then that way your student um, will learn, they'll learn quicker, and you both will have more confidence in your spinning abilities.
Marketing yourself difficult for you?
Uh, it's always a work in progress, always just trying to keep on top of everything, as you know, the platforms are always changing, so it's just keeping up with everything. Yeah.
Well, do you ever regret getting into the teaching and saying like, I could have just spun for myself, meditated. Instead, I find myself like explaining it to some other people. Like, why did I do that?
My whole fulfillment comes from seeing somebody that didn't have any clue how to spin and now is spinning at the end of the class. To me, I get so much joy out of that, even though it may sound corny, but I get so much joy out of that versus just sitting at home and spinning on my own.
What's your favorite and least favorite thing about social media?
My favorite is the connections that you can make with people that are in all parts of the world. I just think that that's just amazing. I love that. And my least favorite is that just when you've learned how to figure out the latest app or something, things change.
I know it can be frustrating.
Yeah.
So you mentioned to me that your husband and you just recently designed different kind of spindle, right? Like, can you show it to us?
Sure, sure. So this is a Turkish spindle. And when my husband said that he could 3D print one for me, I said, okay, well, it's got to have some very specific design elements. The first one is it has to have a really nice point on the bottom, and it has to have a very tapered tip. And the reason is because 99% of the time I use a Turkish spindle as a support spindle, and I love a really thin tip. You'll see other Turkish spindles that aren't designed to be used as a support spindle. They're designed to be used as a drop spindle. They will usually have, well, I won't say they usually have a flat bottom, but they don't have a real fine tip. And they also have at the top like a nub, so that when you go to do your half hitch like this, there's actually like a bulb here so that it won't slip off. And you can still do that. Like I can still use this as like a drop spindle, Turkish that way. But myself, I really have grown fond of using it as a support spindle, because then I can just, butterfly it off like this. So I've got it on my temporary, and now I can just put it on my Turkish spindle or on the arms like that. And then this is your storage area. So this is where all your spun fiber is. And then when you come to being finished, you just take this out, and then you would slide out each of these arms, and they just come right out. I don't want to do that because I want to keep working on this. So yeah, so that's what is one thing that I've been working on. The other one is every year I have what's called the Advent Fiber Bits Club, and what it is, it's the 24 days leading up to Christmas Day in December, and you get 20 grams of fiber every day in December. And I usually include little gifts and things like that in each bag. And this yarn I did with fiber bits. So I had spun this up. All this yarn was spun on my support spindles, and then I applied it on my wheel. That's the one thing I should tell you, is um, I don't ply on spindles. I always ply on my wheel. But I plied all this on my wheel, and I did a Navajo ply, which means that um, all the colors stayed solid versus them getting this barber pole. I mean, there is a bit of barber pole, but it's not very much. So that's just a style of plying that you can do. So people say, "Oh, I could never spin that much yarn with a spindle," but you would be amazed. You would be amazed at all the little bits of time that you have, just like knitting. People say, "Oh, I could never knit that. I don't have the time." Well, you know, you'd be amazed at all the pockets of time that you have.
How
That's
can
what I think.
people buy the Advent from you?
At the end of June, I'm going to have a listing in the Etsy shop.
And then it's being basically like they're gonna receive it sometime in December.
Yes, actually, I will be finished doing the Advent Fiber Bits Club at the end of October. And then depending on where you live, if you live down in the United States, then I get the boxes sent to you in November, um, first week in November. And then if you live in Canada, then you get your box usually about the middle of November.
Are you ever surprised, like when you see people knitting with that yarn, or like what they create with the yarn that they spun from your fibers? Like, are you surprised at that? Like, how does it feel?
Feels wonderful. Yeah, it feels wonderful. It's, seeing, here's a sample of, well, it's not a sample. This is some comb top that I have. And, it's, it's, it's a real pleasure to dye the fiber and, make up the braid and put it in the shop. But that's the only part that I ever get to, see. And so, consistently, but when I see somebody that has spun up the fiber into yarn and made something, it's like, oh wow, that's a real treat, because I don't always get to see that. So
Do you have favorite colors?
oh yeah. I love pink. I love pink. I love Caribbean blue. Um, some of the dyes I use are Dharma dyes, so I love Caribbean blue. I love fluorescent pink. What else do I love? Espresso. I love espresso. So yeah, yeah.
Well, we're gonna put the links to your Etsy store and your Instagram and all the places there where people can find you in the description of this video. And you guys go and check out those fibers and see if you want to learn how to spin.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for being a guest of my channel today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure. And yeah, it was a wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.